The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome everyone to Razberi's webinar, Successful Convergence of IT and Physical Security. We've had a great response to the webinar today, and for housekeeping, we will have all attendees on mute during this session. At any time during the webinar, you can ask a question in the GoToWebinar interface. We will address all questions at the end of the session, so I hope you can stay with us all the way through the end. Also, we are recording this session, and we will share the recording for you and your colleagues for after the event, and you will be able to get a PowerPoint of all of the slides that we used as well. Now let's introduce our expert panelists. Today we have Stephen Schwartz, our VP of Product Development for Razberi. Stephen is responsible for introducing innovative new products to the video surveillance industry. He manages Razberi's product and software development teams as well as external partnerships. Most recently, he was the CTO for RFID Global Solution and Director of Engineering for Genesta Partnership. We also have with us Jamie Bradford, our Director of Global Sales Engineering for Razberi. Jamie's focus is working with end users to educate, design, and implement Razberi solutions. He plays a key role as a liaison between customers and the Razberi engineering team for development of market-driven solutions that solve problems. Before joining Razberi, Jamie was the Director of System Solutions at Panasonic Corp. With that, I'd like to pass it to Jamie to kick things off.
Thank you, Kelly. As advertised in the webinar, some of the key areas we're going to address today, and one of what I feel is a very important topic is alleviating conflicts between IT and physical security. I think a lot of us that have been in this industry, as well as been on the IT side of the house, know that there sometimes is conflicts with establishing service level agreements, standards between IT departments and other key stakeholders, and one of those being physical security that we're going to talk about. We're also going to talk about impact of new technologies and hardware on our customers' network and infrastructure. And with placing those new technologies, we want to ensure that compliance and security standards are effective and without undue burden to all the stakeholders. And at the end, we're going to do a Q&A session. So as the webinar continues, if you have any questions, please use the webinar chat, or pardon me, the questions, and you can post those, and we'll answer those towards the end of the webinar. So as we look at some of the challenges, physical security is placing more and more devices on our customers' networks and our networks. And it's a common theme in many businesses, regardless of vertical. And these departments depend on IT to provide connectivity of these host systems and the supporting infrastructure. Physical security systems and devices can bring many stresses to these networks. Sometimes it's hundreds, if not thousands, of devices that get added to the network, whether they be cameras, access controllers, intercoms, and other types of sensors. They all can be, or not all of them, but a lot of them can be high bandwidth systems like cameras and viewing clients, and those can place an undue burden on the network infrastructure. Of course, with adding these devices, there's a lot of hardening requirements, updating them with firmware and operating systems, etc. These things can bring known and unknown vulnerabilities to the network. So exposing those can be a challenge, and of course we don't want the hackers and the malicious people to find those vulnerabilities before we can. And of course IT does get a little nervous sometimes when devices get installed on the exterior of buildings. As we get to a single cable infrastructure with access control and intercoms on the exterior of our buildings, that does expose that IT infrastructure to potential malicious behavior. So how does IT ensure security standards are being met? Well, part of that is having an established service level agreement. These are important pieces to have between maybe a security department or other stakeholders that are working with IT. And it does bring a wide range of benefits. These can include improving communications between departments, increasing productivity, performance level, and of course managing expectations. And there's some key pieces to that we need to consider, right? So there's keys to the success. Have a goal, like any kind of project management scope. You want to have a good agreement overview and a good understanding. And of course, it's going to involve multiple parties, so we want to make sure it's mutual. We want to clearly define objectives, and those can include the service agreements of, the priority levels of issues when they arise, how those get addressed, whether it's a physical on-site visit or whether it's a virtual email or chat type of solution. And of course, involve all key stakeholders in the agreement. And these can be very, very important to establishing what those expectations are between the two parties. And of course, looking at security standards as well. What goes on the network? It needs to make sure it meets maybe the IT's the IT's compliance to ensure that you're not putting anything that's proprietary or non-standard on the network. And this can play an important part of both the effectiveness of the systems that you're deploying, as well as meeting the service levels of the IT agreement. And of course, this can present challenges. Sometimes negotiating between departments is required. And so that's part of the keys to success, is possibly negotiating what's important.
So Jamie, you've been on both sides of the fence. You've been a data center manager, and then you've helped customers deploy security systems. What are some things that you see common mistakes that are made in either establishing an SLA or not even doing it?
So that's a great point. So yeah, back in my career, I was a data center manager, and we did have established SLAs between multiple departments. It was in healthcare, so there was a lot of different departments that we were responsible for. And as I moved into physical security, I really reflected back and learned that, wow, I wish I had a lot of these same things in my data center management type of responsibilities in the physical security realm. Because there's a lot of gaps, and there's a lot of finger pointing, and there's a lot of who's going to call who, and
who got notified first and second, escalation,
exactly,
and all those sorts of things.
And as compliance and regulations started popping up, making sure things were audited, reported on, etc., because of the systems that these other departments are bringing forward, presented a lot of challenges as well.
Well, I know you and I have worked on a checklist or a template for this too, so maybe we'll start sharing some of those ideas as we go through.
Exactly.
So one of the big challenges that IT and security share, I think they'll all agree, is the emergence of all these new devices that are being put at the edge. On that little slide on the right-hand side has been referenced several times by a lot of different companies. The end number is debatable, but it's certainly an exponential growth in the number of IP devices that are going to be on the edge in the next 10 years. So more and more devices, that means more firmware updates, more IP management, more vulnerabilities, and how do you configure it? And clearly, IT staffing is not going to keep up with that. You can't throw a new person at every new device that you have on the network. So you need a way to be able to not only just secure those devices, but manage them in a more automated way. And that centralization, automation, and protection are three really critical keys that every corporation needs to think about as they look at their edge and how they're going to adopt new hardware.
Yeah, and manage it. Yep, and manage it for sure. So with those new devices that are getting added, specific to physical security, we're seeing a lot of new advancements in technology. Advanced object search. So we start looking at artificial intelligence and video analytics and
GPU, VPU, different ideas on how to process video. A lot of horsepower being put right at the edge now that wasn't there 2-3 years ago.
That's right. So as we look back at standards and SLAs, this new technology does bring in a lot of new burdens and a lot of new skill sets. And in the next slide, I want to point out in this chart from WebRoot, one of the things that's on the rise is cryptojacking and crypto mining. And as we're adding new high performance technology at the edge, GPUs. With this on the rise, this is a target that
Right.
people are looking
I mean,
for.
that was never a target before because it was in your core of your data center. And now that facial recognition, biometrics, all the cool things that are really important to help protecting the new technologies out there, they're now a new threat vector
Exactly.
to IT. And yet security has the responsibility to bring those to market to their customers.
Exactly. So that's something that would be on the watch list, right? So this is a new and increased threat at the edge, is tools that the hackers are using looking for high performance machines to take advantage of and leverage.
They're mining Bitcoin, whatever they're doing with that. They want that CPU to run their own businesses, if you would.
Exactly. So one of this, I wanted to put this slide in here. It's kind of a confusing slide, but Razberi works with different types of verticals, and some of the research we've done specifically in the industrial control systems, we saw a lot of parallels to what's going on in physical security and what's going on in ICS or industrial control systems. And as they're going through a convergence with operational technologies, I thought this would be of value to talk about and maybe point out one or two of these items here that we see that controls are being implemented, but may not be so effective.
Yeah, they're not really happy with the results. So
Exactly.
Just as an example, about fourth from the bottom, device access control. Over almost 50% of the corporations are implementing some sort of device access control, how you log in, but they really feel it's only 18% effective. So this gap analysis between what's effective, we see a very strong parallel. So you can use this slide as you look at your own corporation to see parallels, regardless of which industry. And there's a lot of different standards out there that are being applied against that, right? Like if you're in the government, it's NIST. What are some others, Jamie, that you've run into?
So a lot of our customers in the critical infrastructure vertical have to apply to what's called critical infrastructure protection.
Right.
And there's a lot of standards that they have to meet, and not only the standards and the measures that they employ and the controls, but also reporting on those as well.
HIPAA, if you're in the healthcare, or SOX, PCI type of requirements, and the GDPR. And
yeah, that's a new one.
Brand new one that just came up, and it's requiring a lot more protection for web access, personal data. And to go back to that earlier slide about the facial recognition, that really plays a big part in that GDPR. Yeah, it's my image, my personal,
information,
right?
Exactly. So as we talk about some of those controls, and we talk about some of the governance or the regulatory bodies, I wanted to point out a few. One from a control or measure perspective, and another one from a monitoring or auditing perspective. So in this specific one, I wanted to point out, this is ports and services, right? So this is really at the edge, right? The perimeter. And so if we just read through it, the responsible entity shall establish and document and implement a process to ensure only those ports and services required for normal and emergency operations are enabled.
Right, and so I see this requirement in a lot of verticals. Imagine you've got a just voice over IP telephone. Well, I don't want people FTPing to that device to use it. So it's kind of a common sense thing, but it's not easy to implement. How do I know which services are required for all these new endpoint devices? It can be a real challenge, and I think that's an area we focused on for cameras, access control, and other verticals to make that easier to navigate.
Yeah, so when you start talking about hundreds and thousands of devices on the perimeter, to really manage those.
How do I know which ports I should open or not open? People end up not doing it, and then they have this huge vulnerability. That's the end result.
Exactly. And then the second one, basically establishing methods and procedures to log and maintain historical audit trails of activity.
Right. We were working with a customer recently who was going through a critical infrastructure protection audit. They had to show every time somebody logged in, who logged in, what did they do, did they change something? And that was a really important thing that we added to our product because we saw that that's a universal requirement, regardless if it's just critical infrastructure, healthcare, PCI, security. They need to be able to show that.
Exactly. So as we talk about all these things, we want to kind of circle this back to, what Razberi provides. And one of the things we wanted to really touch on is our Razberi technology's value. So we have established this in 3 pillars: network optimization, cybersecurity, and remote health monitoring. So, as well as an open platform, right? So as we go back to standards and those type things, establish.
I always like the analogy of a stool that you go to a bar store or whatever, and you've got at least 3 legs, right? If any one of those legs is broken, you're going to fall down. I think and yet you want it open. You want anybody to be able to use your platform, and that's really our core mantra here, is keeping things simple, but having those 3 pillars there to promote an open approach to our product and solutions.
So one of the key things, and we talked about it a little bit, is the cybersecurity side, and really the edge is the new battleground, right? That's kind of our mantra around here.
Yeah, we see it.
And being able to comply to the regulatory and compliance type bodies is very important. We pay attention to those, so we want to ensure that we're making product that meets those compliance requirements.
Well, I think this also speaks to the convergence issue. No one's going to be more secured about infrastructure than IT, because they have to own the whole thing.
That's right.
But security needs their edge. They need to have guaranteed video quality. They can't be dropping frames. So that's that network optimization piece. But on the other spectrum, both IT and security needs to know when a camera is down and who's going to fix the camera.
That goes back to the SLA.
Exactly. And then the cybersecurity is there as insurance, so you don't have to worry about, is my camera working? Am I causing a problem? Am I going to have to go through a litany of checklists? So I can just implement a new technology. And I think these are the challenges we're working with our customers to help solve.
Exactly. So a little bit about the Razberi Appliances. So as we talk about the edge, we have our flagship product, the Razberi Server Switch IQ. And this is kind of an all-in-one, compute node, storage, network PoE switching, a true smart layer 2 switch that we program and develop very sophisticated solutions.
Right. We own that switch fabric. We're not farming that out, because we wanted to be able to do things nobody else would do, like monitor video quality, be the watchdog between the VMS, the video management software, and the camera.
That's right.
And I think that's a really important feature that we've added to the market.
And do it simple. Right?
Exactly. You don't have to have a Cisco certified network a degree to use our products. We're trying to make this easy for any end user or installer to install, maintain, and manage.
And another product that we released last year was our Edge Switch Appliance, which is our endpoint defender. And basically this enables you to scale the network fabric, the PoE
That's right.
switching.
All of the monitoring and management of your end devices, with a focus on video and security devices initially. You can now scale those out and manage hundreds and thousands of devices, all with Razberi Monitor now.
That's great. And so Core Server Appliance is our newest product. This is our data center class compute node for those that have that centralized type of infrastructure. We do support GPU solutions within this product. So as we talk about some of the new technologies like
facial recognition,
behavioral analytics, et cetera,
exactly.
that leverage that technology, and really high capacity, high throughput. So when we look at scaling to hundreds of devices, thousands of devices, this type of product really.
And then designed with an interlink between that edge. So if you're using any VMS out there, we're out there to help integrate that with them for reporting and monitoring. And even products like SolarWinds, enterprise class monitoring systems we're integrating to as well.
So our Edge Server Switch and our Core Server Appliance is the compute node, really fits hand in glove with our new Endpoint Defender Edge Switch Appliance.
That's right. So I'd like to share a little bit about that convergence. I see this as a big enabler for security to check off a lot of those compliance requirements that IT is concerned about. We're able to do things like MAC spoofing and binding. So if you do put that camera external to the building, or you've got access control that now uses an IP address, you can immediately bind that IP address and prevent MAC spoofing without having to have tons of knowledge and scripts running and the firewall. That one feature we talked about in the standard where I could limit services. Like, I don't know what services this camera or controller need. We've done a lot of that work for you, so it's a one-click type of a button. And now only those services are allowed to talk to cameras. And then the password protection, I mentioned the access device, getting device access. We're doing some very innovative industry first on that so that when people log into cameras, we can tell if they're following NIST standards for password complexity without having to have any impact on that negotiation. And I think the next part of that is then the monitoring part as well, which we're going to talk about. It does no good to detect this if you can't give that information to IT, but also your security team who may have actually that level 1 responsibility.
Sure. So before we leave the slide, so we talked about the growing number of devices and skill sets, and we hear from CSOs to say we want to go back to basics, we want to go back to automation or add automation to the solution. So what does the Razberi Camera Defense really offer in those?
So what it does would take less than 3 minutes. Maybe we were seeing people automate an entire 24 cameras or 24 different devices in less than 3 minutes. They're able to do all of these security practices that are commonly required and yet you don't have to learn new skills. So it's extremely simple, but it automates all of the best practices that camera manufacturers require, and other endpoints, and IT. And so now you've got this convergence of it's secure, but it also is connected correctly to my network.
Yeah. So when I meet with a lot of IT directors and we talk about this and we demonstrate this, the feedback I get is, I'm glad somebody's thinking about this at the edge.
Yeah, I mean, we felt it was the responsible thing to do. With all these cameras coming out and edicts coming from governments about not using specific cameras because of their vulnerabilities, we felt we really had to treat every endpoint as a vulnerable device, right?
That's right.
And then on our core product, as we were talking about all the CPU and the memory and the processing capabilities, the GPU, we've partnered with what we feel is one of the leading companies out there, and that's Cylance. They have a unique value prop that we didn't see in any other
endpoint protection.
Right. In that they only take around 50 megabytes of memory. It's just a small amount of memory. They never interfere with the VMS. We have full control over the ability to qualify different VMSs and applications, and they're AI based, so they don't require signatures, and we alert to that too. So now you would get a threat alert right within your pane of glass, whether it's SolarWinds or a syslog or it's Milestone or some other VMS. We now integrate to those, so you have that kind of alerting capability and protection at the edge as more and more processing is done at the edge.
So I think that's important that you mentioned that this works in an offline type of mode.
It doesn't require internet access. It was designed to work in embedded devices,
like
appliances,
healthcare.
Exactly, and that's why we selected it. And they've continue to add more features that allow it to be updated remotely.
So Stephen, why don't you take us through? I wanted to add this slide in the presentation to kind of look at the way we look at security holistically, right, in a layered approach. And I think that's a key takeaway from today's meeting or today's webinar, is to look at security in a layered approach.
Yeah, I mean, if you talk to any professional security officer, they're going to say, look, no one thing is the magic bullet. But none of us have the time to go through all of the different layers to give a holistic approach. I mean, it takes a full-time job to think about that.
Exactly.
And we said, look, that's too complicated. But what we did look at is the models that people use today that can be related between IT and security and other groups. And I think the ISO layer,
and that's a standard.
It's a standard model that people all relate to. And we started to map from a holistic perspective a comprehensive view of how systems communicate and what we can do with our endpoint defender and our host systems to prevent and make it incredibly difficult for a hacker to get into your system. So just very quickly here, you can see, if you're familiar with the ISO layers, just think of them as they cover every aspect of the operation of a system, right? From connecting to it, to authenticating, to maintaining sessions, to presenting that data, and then the application itself. And as you can see on the right-hand side, we have features within our camera health and camera defense and our Razberi Monitor products that clearly map to each one of those layers as appropriate, right?
Right. So a lot of people can they look at this and say, this is complex. You know, I don't know what MAC binding is or whitelisting is. And that's one of the things that Raspberry is trying to really focus on, is making things complex a lot more easy and simple.
Exactly.
That your common installer, or you're not a CCNA or CCIE or checkpoint certified guy,
right,
that can really address these complicated things in an easy manner.
Right. And we visit end installers regularly, and we ask them, hey, how can we make this easier and quicker so that your total cost of ownership of our system is going to be nothing like what you could imagine it, being able to change a camera quickly,
right,
but yet do all the security features, replace a hard disk, but do that incredibly quick and accurately, and give the product manager, end user, and installer immediate notifications when those are done.
So as we look at, our system integrators that are doing these installations, that our customers or their customers are asking them, you have to do these things, right?
Right.
So it's difficult for these guys to scan the market and look at, what am I going to, do I have to buy a 3-layered cake to be able to perform these?
What skill sets do I have to train my installers to do? And I think that's where we really add a lot of value to that group, because now they don't have to learn. They can use one button, basically, and in some areas to cover hundreds of products variations.
All right. So you talked a little bit earlier about monitoring, and we say meeting the challenges, right? So we know there's going to be different stakeholders when we're talking about IT. We're talking about maybe internal audit or compliance within an organization, as well as the security department, right? So as things are getting implemented from a physical security or IoT perspective, it's important to see performance, see health, see notifications on maybe bad behavior or
uptime. Hey, is my video really streaming? Not just the camera's turned on.
Right.
And then we had a great conversation with a customer recently who at 3 o'clock in the morning, the camera went down. The IT guy didn't know about it till the next day, but the security guy knew about it right away, and they didn't have that. They didn't understand the urgency of that. And because of the way where it was located at a customer site involving law enforcement and things like that. So what we've done is focused on not necessarily having to be the pane of glass, but getting those critical alerts and notifications to both IT, end users, and installers who may have that service level agreement.
Exactly.
And we put it in terms that allow that quick integration. So whether you're doing syslog or SolarWinds or Milestone or some other VMS, we also offer for those who don't have the sophisticated system yet, that aspire to really have that kind of holistic approach, our Monitor Cloud offering, which is very secure and allows you to get SMS messages and email messages and forward those to the right people, and to drill down into the actual hardware, see what camera is messing up, or see what video is not rebooting the camera remotely. Those are the kinds of things that we want to provide our end users and installers and IT in a shared environment.
So, Stephen, I know you and your team have worked a lot on making sure this also is a very holistic approach to notification and monitoring, and being able to provide it to different stakeholders within an organization. And as we look at your products that you build, like the Endpoint Defenders, the Core, the Server Switch IQ, it's an all common theme with our Razberi Monitor, correct?
That's right. It doesn't even have to be on our platform. It could be on any .NET platform, any Windows type environment, and you could still be monitoring thousands of cameras. You could be integrated to the cloud securely, and this will work in cities. It will work in critical infrastructure. We've done our due diligence. I used to work with DARPA for a while on different security things and help with network design on that. So we passed the test on the security side. Now it's really about helping to bridge those gaps between IT and the critical infrastructure folks, the end users, giving them the right data that they can make decisions in a collaborative way, to resolve things quickly, less expensively, and then resolve them simply, right?
That's right. And a key piece to this too is the audit log, right? To be able to provide the compliance and the regulatory folks those reports on how the thing's hardened, how it's performing.
Nobody likes to have to go through an audit, but if you do, you need to have that as background material.
All right. So if we look at the solution of Razberi Technologies, our new tagline, simple, secure, video surveillance, and IoT, right? So we look at our appliances, we look at the applications your team writes with automated security and health monitoring, video health, and a lot of neat tools coming down the road and our roadmap for that. Really, we have that holistic approach from hardware to applications to monitoring, as well as the bandwidth management, et cetera. So I think this is a kind of a great segue to go into some Q&A, but as we kind of end the webinar, some of the key takeaways that we talked about, right? So establishing good SLAs between IT and other stakeholders, right? And as Stephen mentioned, I think we have some tools that we can provide.
Yes, Jamie and I and other customers have helped us create a template for SLA. So at the end of this, if you would like something, you're going to get an email from us, respond back saying, hey, I'd like that template, that SLA template.
You bet. And of course, looking at standards, right? Employ IT security and compliance standards. Look for open platforms, non-proprietary systems. You can argue both ways, but really having an open platform, because when we look at third-party integrations through IT systems and stuff, it has to be an open platform.
Yeah,
open standards.
It does, and if you don't do that, then having that conversation later gets more confrontational, quite honestly.
Right. And also develop a robust monitoring and reporting system. So again, this goes back to kind of all your different stakeholders that you're serving, including your customer, to be able to report on health, performance, metrics, cyber threats, et cetera.
Right, exactly. They'll have their own preferred pane of glass that they need to look for their own metrics. But everything from cybersecurity to network performance to camera video health, endpoint health, we can funnel those to the right pane of glass, whether it be something like SolarWinds or a syslog server or your Milestone or Genetec type VMSs. We can help enable those to be your pane of glass for what you need.
Exactly. And of course, as Stephen, you talked very eloquently about, take a layered approach for cybersecurity. There is no silver bullet. We know that.
Yeah.
We can go back to the medieval days and say a layered defense is important, right?
Yeah,
you have to have your archers.
The moats, the wall, they just changed now.
That's right.
They're still there.
That's right. Warfare hasn't changed in thousands of years, and cybersecurity is no different.
Just the technologies.
Just the technologies has, that's right. And of course, select vendors and solutions that focus on both IT and security convergence. We see this not only in physical security, but in operational technologies, IoT, IoT.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of convergence that's happening, and really pay attention to the convergence that these two groups.
Are they focusing on what you care about?
Exactly.
And are they willing to have a dialogue with IT, your stakeholders, and help facilitate a solution that is going to allow you to scale and adopt new technologies? A lot of times that becomes a barrier just because you want to, hey, I really want to bring in facial recognition or behavioral recognition technologies. Well, hey, are you doing all these standards? Well, those could, if not done correctly, could end up impacting the performance of them, right?
Exactly. So as we close out get close to the end of the webinar here, I think the next thing is opening up for some questions.
Thank you very much, Stephen and Jamie. That was a great overview of a very important topic. And based on all of your experience, we all gained a lot of knowledge today. Now I'm going to open it up to questions. So please share your questions in the question window. Well, we have a few already coming in, so let me get started. Jamie and Stephen, my IT department wants to upgrade Windows 10 on my server switch IQ. Should I let them? Will it impact my VMS performance?
Oh, I've heard that one before. Obviously, you want to make sure that security patches are on your Raspberry devices. However, I would say that you don't want to blindly do that. We recently had a customer who updated security patches to the appliance, and it ended up causing it to reboot in the middle of the night because they didn't realize that it required a change that did that, and they lost video during a interview at a law enforcement agency that had big repercussions. So I think, imagine this were an accounting system or a trading system, not just security. You have to have that sandbox and be able to make sure that when you do upgrade, you're validating that against the system.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to one of the first things we talked about too is service level agreements, right?
Yeah.
So if your IT is going to be involved in your infrastructure, which they probably are, is have that established change control window to say, yes, we are going to do upgrades, or we're going to push updates to the appliances or to the systems.
I think one misunderstanding is, well, while we may have Windows 10, it's not Windows 10 that most IT people are familiar with. It's the long-term Service Branch Edition, which is designed not to really be updated if you don't need it to. It's a mission-critical version of Windows 10, so it's not the same version that is on your laptop.
Yeah, and I think the DoD and a lot of government agencies have standardized on this platform due to that.
That's correct. It's if you go to Wikipedia or something, you can see long-term service branch is a separate variation of Windows 10 that doesn't require as many updates and has. So I think it's more of an appliance embedded environment.
Yeah.
Good question.
Thank you very much. Here is our next question. We have several different camera vendors on our system. How can I ensure they don't cause cyber issues?
Well, that's a great question. I think Stephen and I can probably tag team this. So we do see hundreds of 200s and 300 different types of manufacturers, and we see a lot of value line. And sometimes things can get turned off, sometimes in firmware, sometimes things can't. And when I say things, I mean services and ports and things of that nature. So the challenge is being able to kind of like when that SIP turning off ports and services, we want to make sure that it's not reaching out to a dynamic DNS or some host system or some data center maybe across Pacific to maybe the original manufacturer,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
We've seen that before, right?
Yeah,
We've seen
that's
cameras
true.
phone home, and we've seen things that you can't turn off. We've seen cameras that get infected with denial of service attacks.
Yeah, or they're still in their root password type. They're in their default password, and people can get access to them. And now it becomes a platform for the cryptojacking.
Exactly. So the question, how can I ensure they don't cause cyber issues? And I'm going to bring it right back to our product, our camera defense product, being able to lock it down to say you're only, like a whitelist, to say you're only allowed to communicate with the hosts that I designate. And if it tries to reach out and communicate to, let's say, a third party, to stop it and to notify you that, hey, this is
right. And I think
bad behavior.
The simple part of that is, well, I don't know what services to allow or not allow. And I think that's where we said, look, we didn't understand that. And we have, you just plug it in. It's a camera. We already have the recommended services, and only those services will work, and not things like file transfer protocols and Bonjour and other discovery protocols that are common threat vectors that let people use your camera with you not even knowing.
Exactly.
And with that, I actually have a follow-up question to that being asked. Do you recommend your switches to be installed between the cameras and the company intranet?
Yes, actually, we are at that access layer. So we provide PoE to those. And because we're doing that, we're doing some very unique things. We can prevent that MAC spoofing, for example. We can also be the watchdog between your VMS and your camera. So, if your VMS were to go south, right, how do you know? It may be your only reporting mechanism. Well, our switch actually monitors the traffic between the camera and the VMS and says, hey, wait a minute, it hasn't been communicating for X, it's not, the bit rate's too low. And now suddenly you'll get an alert that you have no streaming video, even if your VMS is not working. So, if you have more questions, please add those to your response to the email, and we'd be happy to follow up with you.
Yeah, that's a great point. And as we deal with a lot of VMSs, some are more sophisticated than others.
Yes.
Some can report on those type things, and some that don't necessarily have those monitoring tools. So in an open platform, being able to look at real-time streaming protocol and motion JPEG type streams,
Yeah.
regardless of the VMS, and be able to report on health.
Well, yeah,
is
and
very important.
the other thing that we do is it's really an industry first. It's that password protection feature. I didn't really have time to go into it, but we're deep packet inspecting to make sure that when people log into cameras or other endpoint devices, that it's a secure password. It's not like 12345 or admin type thing. So that's something that a VMS can't really do very well because of the way other people can get into your cameras.
Exactly, yeah.
And I know, Jamie, you talked about Razberi being an open platform, but has Razberi interfaced with ExactVision VMS?
So we provide a syslog type of an interface to Exact, and we have looked at their interfaces, and I think we can do that. If we just need to talk to you, if you have a requirement to do Exact after this, please respond in the email. We can provide you some documentation on our syslog implementation that, I'm sure they accept syslog messages. So
Yeah, I think what we've learned with syslog and some of your research and the Gartner, the Magic Quadrant, that a lot of the network and security monitoring tools are using that standard protocol, that messaging protocol, to basically receive messages.
Right, and I'd be happy to work with you on that and provide you the documentation so that you could implement something like that rather quickly.
You bet.
And here's another question. Would Razberi have any example SLAs that they could use with their IT department? And also, if they do, anything that they could use with their customers?
You bet. So as Stephen and I mentioned kind of throughout the webinar, we, through kind of our history of working in different industries and working with our customers, we have a template that we can provide. Again, with the email that goes out after this webinar, if you're interested in receiving that, please please reply, and we'll share that with you in a PDF or Word doc type
sort of
format.
best practices to help negotiate that.
Yeah, and it's not constrained or constrained. It's very generic, but it's the key pieces that you need to talk about. Almost like a project management.
Yeah, you don't want to miss certain things that could end up as you want to deploy new technologies, for example.
Exactly.
Well, again, thank you very much, Stephen and Jamie. That was great. I appreciate not only the presentation, but answering the questions. I also want to thank everyone in attendance today for coming on to the webinar. I hope you've been able to gain the knowledge needed to assist not only you, but your IT and physical security teams with their compliance concerns. Again, we'll be sending out the slides and recorded version, so you can share this with others in your organization as well. And don't forget, once we send that out, you can request your SLA template that we would be happy to send to you. Thank you again for your continued support of Razberi Technologies, and have a great day.